ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो नो प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaste, my dear friends. This is video number 5 on the Ramana Gita. This video starts with chapter 8 on ashrams. Caste. Ramana makes it clear that these restrictions have no connection with seeking self-knowledge. All that is needed is the maturity for such enquiry. Verse 3. The stages are ladders for reaching the supreme. They do not apply to one with a mature mind. Commentary. Here again, Ramana emphasizes that question of stages and gradual development would not apply to those who have, through proper practices, succeeded in purifying the mind. Krishna Bhiksu translation 4. This order of the ashrams is again prescribed that the affairs of the world may go on smoothly and well. The duties of the first three ashrams do not go against jnana. 5. Asceticism means pure jnana, not wearing the ochre robe or having a tonsure. However, initiation into asceticism is accepted as a way to remove several hindrances in one's path. 6. Were spiritual power kindled in brahmacharya, the first asrama, by discipline, it becomes later a big flame by thorough study of scriptures and increase in higher knowledge. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 4. It is for smooth working of the affairs of the world that these stages in life have been prescribed. The first three stages do not stand in the way on knowledge. Commentary. Ramana negates the popular belief that one has to renounce home in order to attain self-knowledge. Firstly, whether one is able to renounce home or is forced to stay in it depends on the karmic forces at work. Secondly, the discriminative faculty, the capacity to inquire about one's true nature, is a liberty given to all. Thirdly, the renunciation necessary for knowledge is of attachments of the mind. Ramana told a person who wished to resign his job, renunciation does not imply apparent divesting of customs, family ties, home, etc., but renunciation of desires and attachment. There is no need to resign your job but to resign yourself to Him, the bearer of the burden of all. Comes from his table by Swami Ramananda Savarnagiri, page 43. Verse 5. Sannyasa, true renunciation, is pure knowledge. It is not the ochre robe or a seven head. However, this stage is intended to ward off obstacles to knowledge. Another translation of verse number 5. Popular opinion or doctrine Mataha states that this stage of life is for warding off various hindrances. However, in truth, sannyasa is unsullied knowledge, not an ochre robe or seven head. Commentary. Ordinary Ordinarily, After going through the first three stages, bachelor, householder, forest dweller, one is expected to renounce everything. The symbol of such renunciation is the wearing of ochre cloth and the shaving of the head. But these are only outward marks. What matters is the renunciation of ego. The one who does so is a pure flame of knowledge, a true sannyasi. This is not to say that the fourth stage is purposeless. Its value consists in creating outer circumstances conducive to pursuit of self-knowledge. Note that the next three verses deal with the reverse position, the specific question whether the householder can attain knowledge. Verse 6: one whose energies are well developed even as a bachelor by diligent study of scriptures and by practices suited to attainment of knowledge shines more in later life. Krishna Bhiksu Translation 7. A pure brahmachari becomes a pure householder. That asrama exists that all the world may be served and benefited. 8. Even for the embodied householder, if he be completely non-attached, the supreme light shines forth for him or her without doubt. 9. The learned prescribe the third asrama, that of the anchorite for tapas, keen spiritual endeavor. One should become an anchorite whether with a wife or without one. 10. When the sins of a yogi of a ripe mind are burned away by tapas, asceticism, the fourth estate comes by itself in its own good time. 11. These numbers indicate verse number. This added instru this added instruction in the seventh and eighth chapters was given by Bhagavan the same year on the 12th of August 1917. A.R. Natarajan Translation Verse 6: one whose energies are well developed even as a bachelor by diligent study of scriptures and by practices suited to attainment of knowledge shines more in later life. Verse 7: purity as a bachelor leads to purity in life as a householder. The householder's role is to benefit all. Verse 8: even for householder, if he is completely detached, the supreme light shines forth. This is certain. Commentary. In common parlance, a married person is regarded as fit only for performance of worldly duties. It is believed that he cannot become self-aware. Ramana's reply Ramana's replies to two specific questions on this point are worth noting. A seeker queried, can a married man realize the self? How does a grasta fare in the scheme of liberation? Ramana replied, married or unmarried, a man can realize the self, but that is here and now. Why do you think you are a grihastha? Whether you continue in the household or renounce it and go to the forest, your mind haunts you. Your efforts can be made even now. whatever be the environment. True penance is finding out the nature of the mind and abiding at its source, the self. For this, no stage of life is a hindrance. Maharishi's Gospel, page 5 and 7, verse 9. The learned prescribe a life in the forest as a third stage for performance of austerities. At this stage, one may be with or without one's wife. Commentary. Under modern conditions, leading a life of seclusion, of withdrawal from activities, would correspond to this stage. The purpose is to orient oneself to an exclusive spiritual life. Verse 10. For the yogi whose tapas penance has burnt away his sins, the fourth stage, sannyasa, comes by itself in due time. Commentary. Renunciation of home is recommended in scriptures when one has graduated to it after having gone through three earlier stages. But this does not hold true for those who are ripe for incessant pursuit of enquiry. For them the dross is burnt away by the dips into the heart during the practice of self-enquiry. The true meaning of tapas is the state when the truth shines forth in all its fullness, when all mental activities have ceased. The natural state is free from sloth. One established firmly in it is incessantly performing the most difficult tapas spontaneously. Upadesa Sarm, verse 30, Ramana Gita, chapter 11, verse 18. Verse 11 is teaching in the 7th and 8th chapter was given by Bhagavan on the 12th August 1917. Krishna Bhiksu translation. 1. On the night of August 14, I, Ganapati Muni, put a question to the Maharshi regarding Granthi Bheda on cutting the knot, on which even the learned have doubts. 2. The high-minded Bhagavan Sri Ramana Rishi listened to my question, spent a time meditating in his divine mode and spoke. 3. The association of the self with the body is called the Granthi knot. By that association alone, one is conscious of his body and actions. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 1. On 14th August at night, I questioned the Maharshi on the cutting of the knot, regarding which even the learned have doubts. End of chapter 8. Chapter 9 on cutting the knot, Granthi Bheda. Commentary. Ganapati Muni himself seeks clarification on this crucial question. It is said that cutting this knot is essential for knowledge. Ramana's detailed explanation in the next 21 verses would underscore the importance of this topic. The first manifestation of ignorance is the rise of the I thought, the individualization of the self. This is described as a knot which an aspirant for liberation has to cut. This idea is found in the Upanishad but nowhere explained technically as in Ramana Gita. Sri Ramana Gita, Dr. V.A. Sharma, The Mountain Path, January 68, page 57-61. Verse 2. The effulgent Bhagavan Ramana Maharshi listened to the question, meditated for a while, and spoke in his divine way. Verse 3. The knot is the link between the self and the body. Awareness of body arises because of this link. Commentary. Consciousness flows from the heart to Sahasrara and spreads from there to the entire body. By itself, the body is insentient, and it is because of this link connecting it to the source of consciousness, the heart, that is, that it becomes active. Heart have been explained in detail in this work itself. Ramana Gita, chapter 5, verse 6 7. Krishna Bhiksu translation. Fourth, the body is completely inert, the self is active and conscious. The mechanics of the flow of consciousness from the their association is inferred from the experience of objects through the intellect. Swaminathan and Vishwanatha and Kapali Sastriar. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 4. The body is matter, the self is consciousness, the link between the two is inferred through the intellect. Commentary. The body is sometimes compared to a corpse by Ramana when the life force leaves the body. If it had an independent consciousness, it would protest against being carried stiff to the cremation ground. It does not, it cannot. In deep sleep, the body from which the mind is switched off is as good as dead and would be taken to be so but for the divine plan that keeps up the minimum breathing. Though inert, it is seen to be conscious and activities continue through it. On the other hand, the self is the fullness of consciousness but remains unseen and unmoving. Though insentient, if bodily movements become possible, would it not be a legitimate inference that the body has a nexus with consciousness? The body becomes conscious only by reason of this association. Ramana explains the nature of this link. The body is insentient, the self does not rise within the body's limit, an I rises between the body and self. It is named knot of matter and spirit. Ego, bondage, subtle body and mind. This is a special contribution of Ramana. The ego individuality is the link, the knot which has to be cut since the nexus, the I, partakes of the characteristics of both consciousness of the heart from which it has risen and of matter, the body with which it is associated. it becomes a bridge back to consciousness. For cutting the knot, the path of self inquiry would be the direct way. Sat Darshanam, verse 24. Krishna Bhiksu translation 5. O child, when the rays of consciousness are reflected in the body acts. In sleep, swoon, etc., the rays are not so reflected and caught, and therefore some other seat of the self is inferred. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 5. It is by the diffused light of consciousness that the body functions. Since there is no awareness of the world in sleep, swoon, and so on, the location of the self is to be inferred. Commentary. The self is all pervasive, yet it must have a location in the body too. How can one state this? This is because daily in sleep, although the body's existence continues, the world is not perceived. Would it then not be reasonable to infer that individual consciousness has merged in its source within the body? The same can be said to be true of other situations like swoon, excessive fear, and so on. When there is no cognition of objects, then too the separate consciousness, the body, mind must have merged within in the conscious source. Again, if activity is possible on waking, should it not be because of the mind and the body being ignited by consciousness within? Since body consciousness is non existent in some states, it follows that the body is not self luminous. From another angle, it would be more appropriate to say that the body too is within the self instead of thinking the self is within the body, for it is the source from which all consciousness is derived. Krishna Bhiksu translation 6. Electricity and similar forces which are subtle pass through the gross wires. Similarly, the light of active consciousness passes through a nadi nerve in the body. 7. The effulgent light of active consciousness starts at a point and gives light to the whole body, even as the sun does to the world. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 6. Just as the unseen electric current passes through the visible wires, the flame of consciousness flows through the various channels in the body. Verse 7. The flame of consciousness, taking hold of a center, lights up the entire body just as the sun illuminates the whole world. Commentary. Two apt analogies have been given by Ramana, who explains in these verses and the subsequent three verses the mode of the flow of consciousness from the heart to different parts of the body. The heart remains in its seat unswerving, but from it emanates the consciousness of the body in the same way as the sun lights the world. The self is the electricity dynamo, the mind is the contact switchboard, while the body is the bulb. The link is through various channels termed nadis. Conscious immortality. Paul Brunton, page 81. Krishna Bhiksu, translation 8. When that light spreads out in the body, one gets experiences in the body. The sages call the original point Hridayam, the heart. 9. The flow of the rays of the light is inferred from the play of forces in the nadis. Each of the forces of the body courses along a special nadi. 10. The active consciousness lies in a distinct and separate nadi, which is called Susumna. Some call it Atma Nadi or and others Amrita Nadi. A.R. Natarajan, translation. Verse 8. It is because of the spreading of consciousness that one becomes aware of the body. The sages say that the center of radiation is the heart. Verse 9. The flow of consciousness is inferred from play of forces in the channels. The forces course the body, each hugging its particular channel. Verse 10. The channel through which consciousness flows is termed Susumna. It is also called Atmanadi, Paranadi, and Amrita Nadi. Verse 11. Because consciousness pervades the entire body, one gets attached to the body, regards the body as the self, and views the world as apart from oneself. Commentary. Though each sense organ has its own channel, the pride of place is for Susmana channel because consciousness flows through it to the mind, and it is the mind which in turn controls the senses. This channel is therefore also termed as the life giving one and the supreme one. Since the entire body is thus permeated by consciousness, the unwary come to identify themselves with the body. They do not pause to consider whether they are only that, nor do they inquire about the source or center of consciousness. If one regards oneself as a particular name and form, he has separated himself from others. Variety is perceived, and the unity behind that is lost sight of. This is termed as primal ignorance, for it is from this that the rest of the attachments flow. Krishna Bhiksu, translation 11. The individual permeates the entire body with that light, then becomes egocentric and thinks that he or she is the body and that the world is different from himself or herself. 12. When the discerning one renounces egotism and the I am the body idea and carries on one pointed inquiry into the self, the movement of life force starts in the nadis. 13. This movement of the force separates the self from the other nadis, and the self then gets confined to the Amrita Nadi alone and shines with a clear light. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 11. Because consciousness pervades the entire body, one gets attached to the body, regards the body as the self, and views the world as apart from oneself. Verse 12. When the discriminating one becomes detached and giving up the idea that one is the body, single mindedly inquires, the churning of the channels take place. Commentary. Ramana now sets out the method for getting rid of this false notion, the wrong notion about oneself, of limiting oneself to a particular name and form, is bound to last only as long as one does not inquire undistractedly. But once inquiry is afoot about the assumption and one searches for the true import of I, then the ego, which cannot bear the searchlight of enquiry, takes it to its heels. Then there is a churning, and the life force, which was disturbed throughout the body, becomes centered in the supreme channel only. In the Ramana path, the enquiry about the self takes place through two attention focusing devices. Where from does this I arise, and what is the truth about the I? Sat Darshanam, verse 25, verse 13. On such churning of the channels, the self gets separated from them and shines forth by clinging to the supreme channel. Commentary. When the spirit of enquiry is absent, the I thought is mixed up with a host of other thoughts. On a properly directed self enquiry, the link with other varied thoughts is cut, dissipation ends, and the mind is gathered together at its root. When it is thus deprived of its associates, the I thought, the ego, has necessarily to fall back on its source, the consciousness. It gets merged there and shines as that. It may be noted that Ramana has stressed that it happens only on single-minded self-enquiry. Sri Kapali Sastri in his commentary refers to the churning of the sea of milk in the Puranas, which produced the drink of immortality Amrita. He says that in like manner self-enquiry disassociates the I thought from other thoughts and establishes the link with the eternal ever liberated self. As a consequence of the single-minded enquiry, the individual functioning hitherto through different nadis stays in the channel linking the Sahasrara with the heart. Krishna Bhiksu translation 14. When the very bright light of that active consciousness shines in the Amrita Nadi alone, nothing else shines forth except the self. 15. In that light, if anything else is seen, even then it does not appear as different from the self. The enlightened one knows the self as vividly as the ignorant one perceives his body. 16. When Atma alone shines within and without and everywhere as body etc., sign to the ignorant, one is said to have severed the knot Granthi Bheda occurs. A.R. Natarajan translation verse 14. When consciousness stays in the supreme channel only, then self alone shines. Verse 15. Even though the objects are near, they are not seen as separate. He is aware of the self as clearly as the ignorant one is of his body. Verse 16. The one to whom the self alone shines within, without, and everywhere as name and form would for the ignorant has cut the knot. These three verses deal with the state of one who has, through self inquiry, succeeded in reaching the self. For this, the mind has to be silent. Only the one whose latent tendencies have been burnt in the fire of knowledge through practice of repeated dips into the heart by vigilant inward search, conceding in this. Thereafter, all duality ceases. A bodily location has been indicated for the heart so long as one has wrongly identified himself with the body. Such indication is necessary and helpful for spiritual practice. Once knowledge dawns, consciousness is seen everywhere and not only within. Why? This is because it is all pervasive, it envelops the entire universe, and nothing can exist apart from it. This means that for the wise, the barrier of space is also cut, not only that of time. Once the limitation of particular name and form is broken, the fullness of existence is felt and is never lost sight of. Is there objective awareness for the wise? Yes, but it does not distract their awareness of the throb of the heart. The manifold forms have lost their power to deceive. For such a one, the formless source of the seen is real, complete. The knot which is cut is the nexus between matter, the body, and consciousness, the heart. Therefore, instead of functioning through the reflected light of consciousness, the mind, one's life would be heart based, action would be perfect. Krishna Bhiksu Translation 17. There are two knots, one the bond of the nadis and two egotism. The self, even though subtle, being tied up in the nadis, sees the entire gross world. 18. When the light withdraws from all other nadis and remains in one nadi alone, the knot between awareness and the body is cut asunder and the light abides as the self. 19. As a ball of iron heated to a high degree appears as a ball of fire, this body heated in the fire of self inquiry becomes as one permeated by the self. A.R. Natarajan Translation Verse 17. The knot is twofold, one of the channels and the other of mental attachment. The perceiver, though subtle, sees the entire gross world through the channels. Commentary. In verse 9 and 10, it was seen that each sense organ is connected to the heart through its own channel. Unless the light of the mind functions, no perception is possible. The perceiver's mind uses the channels and the whole sensory world is felt. This verse 17 refers to the state prior to the cutting of the knot, before self inquiry has fructified and enabled the clinging to a single channel. Verse 18. When the mind is withdrawn from other channels and is in the supreme channel alone, then the link with the body is cut and one abides as the self. Commentary. The idea set out in verse 14 and 15 is reiterated. Verse 19. The body of one who abides in the self through self inquiry is resplendent, just as a heated iron ball appears as a ball of fire. Commentary. The body of the wise is the temple of God, for the consciousness of the self permeates every pore of their body. The body too acquires a special luster. To bring home the point, Ramana gives an analogy. The iron ball by itself is lifeless, but when heated properly, and as long as it remains heated, it will appear like the fire which heated it. It is significant to note that Ramana refers even this verse to the means by which the goal is reached, namely self inquiry. The emphasis This emphasizes its importance. Krishna Bhiksu translation 20. Then for the embodied, the old tendencies inherent are destroyed, and then that one feels no body and therefore will not have the idea that he is an active agent karta. 21. When the self does not have the sense of active agency, karmas, tendencies, actions, and their results, etc., are destroyed for him. As there is none other than except the self, doubts do not sprout for him. 22. Once the knot is cut, one never again gets entangled. In that state lies the highest power and the highest peace. End of chapter. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 20. The latent tendencies of the past pertaining to the body mind complex are destroyed. There is no sense of doership because there is no body consciousness. Verse 21. It is said that the karma of such a one is destroyed due to the absence of the sense of doership. No doubts arise since the self only exists for him. Commentary. It is said that the cutting of the knot ends all doubts and destroys all karma. The why of it will be evident from these two verses. Ramana continues to state that what happens when through intelligent, unvaried search one abides as the self. Not only does the body of such a one shine like a heated ball of iron, he is also freed of all bondage. The momentum of karma stops, for though one may be involved in activity, such activity does not bind in the absence of the idea that it is his action. It is the sense of doership which binds. If one thinks that one is the doer, one must reap the fruits. But this idea ends for him who enquires who is the doer and enters the heart. Then all karma ends. Sat Darshanam, verse 38. Here it may be mentioned that karma is threefold. The total load, sanchita, that which has begun to operate in this life, prarabdha, and that which we are creating now, agami. While it is generally agreed that the balance of old karma and the future karma would be wiped out, some hold the view that the portion of the karma which has started cannot be warded off. One sees the knower to having bodily ailments and so on, and infers that the wise are also still caught in this portion of karma. Ramana, however, negates this idea. He says that it would appear to be so only from the point of view of the onlooker. When the fan is switched off, the movement does not stop immediately, but the wise person is unaffected by the event. He may be suffering, but he does not identify himself with it. Ramana put it in another way. If the agent, the doer upon whom karma depends, namely the ego, merges in its source and loses its form, will karma, which depends on it alone, survive? He also gives an apt analogy to prove his point. If a person who has three wives dies, then none can remain unwidowed. Similarly, when the doership is absent, none of the three forms of karma can survive. Doubts, and because direct experiential knowledge has taken the place of indirect knowledge based only on scriptural studies. Words of Grace Spiritual Instruction, page 61, supplement to the 40 verses, verse 33, verse 22. The one whose knot is cut can never again become bound. This state is one of supreme power and peace. Commentary. The mind of such a one is naturally silent, since all tendencies which externalize the mind have been destroyed. So, the state is understandably one of supreme peace. But how is it supremely powerful as well? This is because it is the ultimate source of everything. In that state, consciousness is untrammeled in any manner. Chapter 9 concluded. Sanskrit version in Sri Ramana's handwriting can be seen in photo file Ramana Gita album. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. 1. We record in this, the 10th chapter, the conversation between Yati Yoganatha and Maharishi Ramana, which will rejoice society. 2. O great sage, what is the relation between society and its members? Lord, be pleased to explain this for the progressive improvement of society. Bhagavan 3. In a society consisting of followers of diverse ways of life, O best of sadhus, society is like the body and the members like its limbs. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 1. This chapter records the conversation between Yoganatha and Maharshi Ramana for conferring joy to the society. End of chapter 9 on cutting the knot, Granthi Bheda. Chapter 10 on society. Verse 2. Great says, what is the relationship between the individual and society? Please explain for the welfare of the society. Commentary. The Maharshi had transcended the rules and obligations of society and was therefore in a position to advise objectively and courageously. Yoganatha is therefore keen that society should benefit from the advice of the Maharshi. Verse 3. In a society comprising of followers of different ways of life, society is like the body and individuals are like the limbs. Commentary. Society comprises of various streams differing on the basis of location, background, and other factors. Even so, they are only parts of the whole of society. Their cohesive functioning is essential as the proper functioning is of each limb is necessary for the human body as a whole. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanatha Swami translation 4 on Sannyasin, a member prospers by working for the good of society like a limb serving its body. 5. Through mind, speech, and body, one should always conduct oneself so as to serve the interest of society and should also awaken his circle to do likewise. 6. One should build up one's own circle so as to serve the interest of society and then make it prosper so that society itself may prosper. A.R. Natarajan translation verse 4. An individual prospers by working for the good of the society like a limb being useful for the body. Verse 5. One should serve the interest of the society through body, speech, and mind and enthuse his circle to do likewise. Commentary. It may be noted that what is emphasized is actual conduct, practice, and not mere preaching. Verse 6. One should build up one's own inner circle and make it proper so that it may serve the interest of society and make it prosper also. Commentary. Working for the welfare of one's own group is not for selfish ends but for prosperity of the entire society, which is seen to be integral. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. 7. Among the wise some extol peace and others power. Which of these, O Lord, is the better means for promoting the well-being of society? 8. Peace is for purifying one's own mind, power for the progress of society. Society should be raised through peace and then power established. Comment. The Jnani mitigates the world situation through his presence. A.R. Natarajan translation. V.S. Yoganatha asked some praise peace, some others extol power, which is needed for the welfare of the society. Verse 8 Bhagavan replied, for purifying one's own mind, peace is required, power for society's progress. Society should be raised through power and then peace should be established. Commentary. For purification of the individual, quietness of mind is a precondition. The spiritual practices necessary for mind's purification are not possible if the mind is disturbed and wandering. Hence, peace is a must for the individual. Society cannot function unless law and order prevails. Power is necessary to sustain order. Maharshi, however, makes it clear that power, though absolutely essential, is not sufficient. Once order is established through power, it is only the peace of the individuals who constitute the society which matters. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Vishwanatha Swami translation 9. O great sage, what is the supreme goal on earth to be attained by human society as a whole? 10. Bhagwan, brotherhood based on sense of equality is the supreme goal to be attained by human society as a whole. 11. Through brotherhood, supreme peace will prevail among mankind, and then this entire planet will flourish like a single household. 12. The conversation between Yoganath, the sannyasi, and the gracious Maharshi took place on the 15th of August 1917. This ends chapter 10. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 9 Yoganatha asked, great sage, what is the supreme goal to be attained by entire human society? Verse 10 Bhagavan replied, brotherhood based on equality is the supreme goal of human society. Verse 11 Through brotherhood, peace and amity will prevail among mankind and the world will flourish like a single household. Commentary. The Maharshi has placed before humanity a lofty ideal. The interrelationship is to be on a feeling of oneness, of equality. This is the most important verse of this chapter, and it visualizes the position as to how the world would be if all are wise. Ramana has earlier referred to equality as the hallmark of the wise. It has been explained there that equality does not mean the absence of difference but awareness of the essential unity. Brotherhood would mean the presence of feeling of oneness. Ramana Gita chapter 1 verse 16. Verse 12. This conversation between the ascetic Yoganatha and the compassionate Ramana took place on the 15th of August 1917. Chapter 10 concluded. Sanskrit version in Sri Ramana's handwriting can be seen in photo file Ramana Gita album. Professor K. Swaminath and Sri Vishwanath Swami translation 1 and 2. On the night of the 16th, when he was alone, I approached the Guru, the great sage, the most eminent of the enlightened, who always abides in the self, the illustrious Ramana, now in human form, and sang his praises so as to be blessed with jnana, hard to gain. A.R. Natarajan translation. Verse 1 and 2 I approached the Guru, preeminent among the knowers of Brahma, who abides always in the self, the great sage, the illustrious Ramana in human form on the night of 16th when he was alone and sang his praise to be blessed with wisdom so hard to attain. Commentary. In the words in the human form, we find a hint of the divine vision which the Muni was blessed with. What vision set out in the later verses enabled him to have an idea of the true stature of Ramana as Subramanya, the god who is regarded as peerless amongst seers of Burma. In this chapter, the questioner is the Muni himself. The praise in 12 verses, which flows mellifluously, evidences the pedestal on which the Muni always places Ramana as the world teacher. Professor K. Swaminathan and Sri Viswanatha Swami translation. End of chapter 10 on society. Next video will start with chapter 11 on compatibility of jnana and siddhis. Thank you for watching this video. Namaskar my dear friends. Thank you.